record reflect we are back in session. Parties and counsel are present. All members of our jury and our alternates are present. Our witness, Mr. Mcstay, is back on the witness stand. Before we resume with the questioning, I did want to give you one jury instruction. You'll get this again at the end of the trial with all of the other instructions, but I did want to go over this one area with you today. This is just a kind of a reminder, a reiteration of what I told you at the very beginning about the attorney's statements are not evidence. Nothing that the attorneys say is evidence. In their opening statements, the attorneys can discuss the case, but their statements are not evidence. The attorney's questions are not evidence. Only the witness's answers are evidence. The attorney's questions are significant only in that they help you understand the witness's answers or testimony. Do not assume that something is true just because one of the attorneys asked a question that suggested that it might be true. Okay? So, part of and Mr. Mullane, you may resume your examination of Mr. Mcstay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yesterday I was about to ask you about your relationship with Summer, and then we took our break. So I was going to ask you, in February of 2010, did something happen where there was some type of argument or disagreement with Summer which caused you to maybe be a little bit more estranged from Joseph and his family?
I don't remember the year, but it was actually July 4th.
You had indicated to Detective DeGaulle that it had been a couple of years prior. Does that sound about right?
I'm not sure if it's 09 or 08.
Okay. But maybe 2 or 3 years prior to the...
No, I think 1 or 2.
1 or 2. Okay, 1 or 2.
If it was 09, it wasn't even a year.
Okay. And so you had some type of disagreement, and that disagreement caused you to have less contact with your brother. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In fact, from that disagreement, you didn't actually see him in person. Is that correct? You talked on the phone but did not actually meet him. Is that correct?
That's incorrect.
Okay. How often did you see him after that disagreement?
We lived about 5 miles away. I lived in Capo. He lived in San Clemente on Cabrillo. He would bring Gianni and Baby Joe over to the park that's about a half mile from my house or a quarter mile from my house, maybe once a month or something to that effect.
So if you had indicated to Detective DeGaulle that you had not seen your brother in about a year, that would be incorrect? Remember when you were interviewed on February 15th?
I'm not sure. I know that I had not been to the house through the end of 09 through February, so okay. I'm not sure.
Well, did you get together for Christmas in 09, do you recall?
No, sir. They had it in Fallbrook, and I was in Orange County.
Okay. In any case, your contact was less, correct, after that?
Yes, sir. It was less.
Okay. And did you have any contact with Summer after that? Can we call it a fallout, or is that too strong of a word?
It was a family squabble.
Okay.
Every family has them.
I can attest to that, yes. So, after that family squabble, did you have contact with Summer personally?
Other than the time I went to his house and prayed for my brother when he was feeling ill, I don't recall.
Okay. The counsel asked you about your involvement with the financial aspect of the business, Earth Inspired Products, after February of 2010, and you indicated that you really didn't have much at all to do with it other than setting up that DBA. Is that correct?
I very minimal. That's correct.
And do you remember when you set that DBA up?
It was after the disappearance and at some point shortly thereafter with the intent for Chase and Dan to still be able to make a living.
Show you documents, see if it refreshes your recollection as to when you would have set that DBA up. I'm gonna have you take a look at this.
Okay. Date on this? Oh, there we go. March 16th, 2010.
Does that sound about right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And along with this DBA, you opened a bank account as well, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you open that?
I believe I did.
Okay. And when you opened the bank account, I think you indicated yesterday that was so that you could receive, I guess, customers.
So there'd be no collusion of funds. I didn't want to touch anything that was my brother's. I just wanted to have the entity at least continue, finish the few production orders. They did do some retail orders, but then after Chase and Dan got into that big argument from my mother, I believe at that point, I don't remember if I shut the account and closed, I don't remember what I did from there, but my mother and I focused on finding our family and forget the business.
I got you. But what I want to know is, what I'm asking you is, when you opened up that bank account, you knew that money was continuing to come in, right? Because people would order things online, right?
Correct.
So from the time that you opened the account, you wanted to deal with earth-inspired products going forward, right? The past was the past, but you didn't want to commingle what was happening from that date forward. Is that correct?
Correct. I wanted to have integrity and avoid the appearance of...
Gotcha. So it was set up to where that bank account that you opened would be receiving funds to do, to ship out waterfalls or fountains, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And to your knowledge, that happened, right? That for at least whatever period of time.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And do you remember where that bank was? Sorry, bad question. Do you know what bank it was? Like Wells Fargo, Chase, Bank of America?
I believe I think my business and I banked at Chase at the time, so it might have been at Chase, but I'm not sure.
I'm going to show you a check. See if that refreshes your recollection, okay?
Yes, sir. I can't read the small print, but it's Chase, and I believe it's the one. I can't read it. I believe it's the one on 638 Camino de los Mares, which would have been right by my house in San Clemente.
Okay.
Capital.
But it was Chase Bank, correct?
It was Chase Bank.
Okay. And there's an address associated with this check for the company Earth Inspired Products, correct?
638 Camino de los Mares.
That would have been your address, correct?
I believe it was a UPS store I used for the physical address
Okay.
with a physical box, and that would be the address of the company.
But this is the account that you set up, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you were, when the, I guess it was when you first were interviewed on February 15th, Detective Dugal was asking you questions. You remember that in front of your brother's house, and you were inside the detective's vehicle?
Correct.
And when you when he was asking you about getting financial records, he wanted financial records, correct?
You mean Duval?
Correct.
I believe so.
Because that would help perhaps locate your brother, right? If they were using credit cards or they were accessing cash, maybe they could find out, or you guys could find out where that was happening, correct?
I'm not a detective, so I don't want to speak for them. I would assume so.
But you
I'm not sure.
you volunteered to go back and look and get financial records or whatever you could find and give it to Detective DeGaul, correct?
I asked them that day what would they be doing, so that's why I took the computer and the pictures.
Okay, but I understand that. I'm going to ask you about that computer in a minute. But what I'm asking you about now is you offered to give financial records to Detective DeGaul. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Do you recall being interviewed throughout 2010 by Detective DeGaul? You talked to him several times, correct?
We talked, yes, yes, we talked often.
Okay, and part of those discussions were going over Joey's company and the financial aspect of his company, correct?
Before,
Just throughout 2010,
I mean, his company, which time frame?
up until the time that he disappeared.
I would relay to Detective Dugal whatever I knew from what Joey had told me directly on the phone or when we had lunch at OC Tavern or whatever.
And you were trying to give him whatever information you could gather, whether it would be records or any other information for that matter, correct?
Certainly, yes, sir.
And you had told him that you would give him, whatever records you had, correct? That could help him?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever give him these Chase bank records?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Did you ever, now fast forward to 2014, I think you were first interviewed perhaps by Detective Bachman, is that correct?
I don't, do you have dates? I don't, yeah, it's all,
Let's say 2013, at the end of 2013.
when they found the bodies?
Correct.
There was two detectives that called me. They were parked in front of my house at the time. I was in a new job. I was working a house in Orange Hills, and I met them at a Starbucks on the corner of Irvine and Jeffrey. And that's when I remember meeting them. I don't remember their names.
Okay. And then after that, you had a series of interviews with various detectives from San Bernardino, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you also, during your interviews with San Bernardino, you also offered to give them whatever records you had or whatever information you had. Is that correct?
I stored 4 or 5 boxes in one of my facilities for over 3 years. On the top shelf, they just sat. And then I offered to give them to them, and I believe they followed me to that address, and I gave them directly to them.
Did you give them the Chase bank records?
I'm not sure what was in the boxes.
Did you ever check, did you ever tell them about the Chase bank record, or the Chase bank account?
I'm not sure.
All right, the computer. You mentioned the computer earlier, and I'll ask you about that now. So just to refresh from yesterday, you, on the 13th of February 13th, 2010, you testified yesterday that you met Chase Merritt at your brother's house, and you both went inside, or you had, you went inside, correct?
I testified that I went inside, and I was not sure if he ever went inside. I opened the slider, offered him to enter, and I don't recall him ever entering the house, nor do I remember where the phone call was placed from.
Correct. But I showed you the report and what you had told Detective Dugal in your February 15th interview, where you had mentioned in your interview then that you let Chase inside the house. And I showed you that, right?
And I clarified that I wasn't sure if I opened the door and he came in, or if that was the front door. So I don't really remember.
I understand, because it's been a long time, but I asked you what, if February 15th, when you were interviewed, was that a fresher time? Because it was February 13th when you had been in the house, correct?
February 13th, I was in the house, and the 15th, I was also in the house.
So that interview was only 2 days later, correct? With Detective Dugal?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it obviously was fresher in your mind then as to what transpired, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. In any case, was it on the 13th that you took the computer? Do you recall?
No, sir.
Do you remember when?
I did not take it on the 13th.
Do you remember when you took the computer?
I took it on the 15th.
So that's when you went with, that's when you were interviewed by Detective Dugal, correct?
And Mr. Tingley at the sheriff's station.
Correct, because you had gone to the sheriff's station first, right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So in the sequence of events, your first stop, because you left work, you said you packed up your tools and everything, and then you headed to the sheriff's station, correct?
To my house, switched vehicles, got in the family vehicle, grabbed my wife at the time, and my 3 daughters.
And you headed to the Fallbrook station.
Headed down to the Fallbrook station, yes, sir.
Okay. And so after you went to the Fallbrook station and you talked to Deputy Tingley, then you went to the house on your own, is that correct?
No, my whole family and I went in the family vehicle, and I can't remember if I led the way and they followed me, or I followed them, but we all went.
So this is on the 15th, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you've already been in the house on the 13th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when you got there on the 15th, did you go inside again with your family?
I had to crawl through the window the same way I did on the 13th, go to the front door, open it, to let the detective in.
Well, let me back up. When you got to the house, after going to the station, you got to the house, was there any detectives at the house when you got there?
I don't recall.
Was it daytime or nighttime when you got to the house on the 15th?
I believe it was in the afternoon, and I know it was cold, but I don't remember rainy or whatever.
Do you remember if you got there on the 15th and you immediately went into the house the same way you had been into the house on the 13th, or did you wait in your car for a while?
I believe the detective asked me to go in the same way that I did.
And this would have been on the phone, or did he?
No, in person when we were on the premise.
Okay, so you didn't go in until Detective Dugal got there.
Objection assumes facts, not evidence. You never mentioned Dugal's name.
I'll ask it again. So you waited till detectives got there before you went into the house, is that your memory?
No, sir.
Okay, so let's try it again. You went to the Fallbrook station, then you went to the Fallbrook house, correct? You're with your family?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you go into the house, or did you wait until the detectives got there to go into the house?
I believe I opened the door for Mr. Tingley. And I'm not sure if Mr. Duval was there yet.
Okay. So you went in and you were with Deputy Tingley, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And you went, and that's when you took the computer?
No, sir. I took it at the end of the day when we were there for many, many hours.
Okay.
And I don't remember if my daughters went in the house or not, because they stayed next door with Heidi, who was taking care of the dog, and I believe they ordered pizza and put them aside because it was a very serious thing.
So when you were in the house with Deputy Tingley, did your family come in with you?
I don't recall.
How long were you in the house with Deputy Tingley before other detectives showed up?
It was a blur. I don't recall. There was a lot of them, a lot of people.
So your interview with Detective Dugal was outside in his car, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is there any reason why it was in those cold, rainy night, right?
I just did what the detectives asked me to do.
Do you know why you didn't just stay in the house and get interviewed there instead of going into the car?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
recall if Detective Dugal went in the house when he got there?
I'm not sure.
Do you recall if any other law enforcement officer other than Deputy Tingley went into the house?
I believe there were multiple police officers inside the house.
And when you took the computer, you said at the end of the day, was that with the permission of the law enforcement officers?
I asked if I would get in trouble for taking anything. They said, no, you're his brother. I'd asked about what they would do. So I took the computer, an external hard drive, and the SD card from the camera. And then had, like I said, had a website made to...
That's right. Where you put the photos, correct?
It was everything.
Okay. And other than those 3 items, did you take anything else, or did you know if your wife or kids took any items?
At that time, nothing else, no. Oh, I'm sorry. I took the 2 dogs to take care of them.
Okay, so that was the day that you took the 2 dogs, correct?
That is correct.
All right.
Bear and Digger. Digger was a Christmas present of 09.
Okay. And so, you would, is it fair to say that you had been in the house on the 15th for a long period of time? Because the afternoon, you said you got there in the afternoon, but your interview with Dugal was at night, correct?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence. Misstates his testimony.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Sure. Your interview with Detective Dugal was at nighttime, correct? That was your testimony earlier?
Afternoon. I don't know the exact time.
Well, it was dark outside, right? You said it was night and it was rainy and it was cold?
Objection misstates his testimony. Counsel said
Okay.
Do you recall when that interview was?
I believe it was in the afternoon. I mean, it was late afternoon. I don't know the exact time. I had to drive from Huntington Beach to Capo, to the station, to Fallbrook. So I had said 9 o'clock. I called in or so around that time on that Monday. So I don't know how many hours went by, and I really don't know how many, if even an hour I was in the house total. So I don't know how long I was in the policeman's car.
So you're saying that your entire time in the house would have been an hour or less, is that right?
objection lacks foundation based on his previous answer.
Approximately.
Okay. Did you, when you had that computer on the 15th, I assume when you took it home, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And at some point, did you take it back to the Fallbrook house?
Yes, sir.
And when was that?
Before they issued the search warrants.
So before they issued the search warrant, which was on the 19th, best you can recall.
It was later that same week.
So did anybody instruct you to take it back?
Yes, sir.
And who was that?
I believe it was Detective Dugal, but I'm not sure. It was one of the police officers, or it could have been one of them.
Okay. And
Martinez, maybe? I don't remember if that was a name at that time. I'm not sure.
but they had given you, I think you indicated that they said that you could take it prior, on the 15th, correct?
Objection, that misstates his testimony.
Objection sustained as cumulative and evidence to 352.
You took it back because Detective Dugal told you to take it back, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in the time that you had the computer, whatever time that was, you weren't able to access it, is that correct?
I didn't have the proper power cord, so I couldn't even get it turned on.
Okay. Let me put it.
Anything on redirect?
A few things. When you met with Deputy Tingley initially at the Fallbrook station, what
What was your mindset? What were you feeling?
At that point, I was pretty worried because when I called into the police station, they insisted I come down.
When you talked to Deputy Tingley, were you able to give precise dates and times as to anything that occurred between February 1st and that day, February 15th?
I was pretty distraught, so if I jumbled some things up, that's a possibility.
Did you have a calendar in front of you?
No, sir.
Did you have notes in front of you?
No, sir.
Did you have phone records in front of you?
No, sir.
Did you have bank records in front of you?
No, sir.
So you were going off the top of your head at that time when you're making a missing persons report for your brother.
To the best of my ability.
So if you misstated driving by the house on the 4th or the 6th, that could be completely wrong, right?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware of any other place in any other interview you did that you repeated that 4th or 6th thing?
I'm not sure.
Well, in fact, when you were interviewed by Detective Fisk later that night or evening, late afternoon, whatever it was, in the car with DeGaulle, she asked you about that statement to Tingley, didn't she?
Maybe.
Did you have a chance to read page 66 of Mr. Moline's transcript this morning, just before testifying?
I didn't know, sir.
The one I handed you?
I read a piece of paper this morning. I don't know what it was.
I'm sorry. Here's page 66 of Mr. Moline's transcript that he didn't show you. Does it ask you about the 4th? Does Detective Fisk ask you about the 4th?
You want me to read the whole thing? Or?
No, read it to yourself.
Okay.
Specifically, to speed it up, I will direct you to starting on line 1470 through the end of the page. Just read it to yourself.
Okay.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, sir.
And when she asked you about your statement about going down on the 4th, what was your response to her?
That I think it was Chase that went down. My first time there was the 13th.
Okay.
Oh,
Your memory sitting here today is, what days were you at the house? At the Fallbrook house?
For sure, the 13th, when I went through the window looking for numbers, and the 15th, when I did the police report and followed up, went over with Mr. Tingley, and then all the sheriff's detectives showed up.
And would it be fair to say that when you went initially to see Deputy Tingley, you were doing everything you could to be helpful to figure out where your brother, Summer, and the boys were?
Yes, sir.
Would that also be true in your cooperation with Detective DeGaulle and Detective Fisk?
Yes, sir.
Isn't that your goal still even today, or up till today, was to find your brother, his wife, and the kids, right?
Yes, sir.
This is the leading to object.
oh, the answer is
I guess I should ask this. So in 9 years, you've met with people from our district attorney's office twice, other than running into them in court, right? That's what you testified to, right?
Yes, sir. I mean, on the day of the arraignment, which was November the 7th of 14, I believe, a Friday. And then on December 19th, I think it was a Wednesday.
Okay, and that's when you got to look at your police reports and
Yes, sir.
and relive 9 years of your brother being gone, right?
Yes, sir.
And what was the most important thing that anyone from my office told you during that meeting?
You guys said, tell the truth to the best of your recollection.
Is that what you're doing?
Yes, sir.
Did you keep a journal? Did you keep a calendar?
I did not.
So when you're giving us dates, it's to the best of your recollection.
Yes, sir.
And that recollection, would it have been affected by running a business, raising a family, looking for your brother, trying to keep his business alive?
Yes, sir.
It was?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I missed a fifth thing. The emotions of losing your entire half of your family, right?
Yes, sir.
That's a lot of weight on your shoulders to try to remember 9 years ago, right?
It's been heavy.
The Chase bank account, that didn't exist on February 15th, did it?
No, sir.
So you didn't have records to give Detective DeGaulle at that time.
No, sir.
How many boxes was it you gave to San Bernardino County?
I don't remember, 4 or 5 maybe.
The interview with Detective DeGaulle in 2010, is it your recollection that you told him, and you told us today, or in this trial, that you had spoke with your dad and were alerted to no one being in contact with him?
That is correct.
Okay. And is it also your recollection that you had some form of contact with Dan Cavanaugh on that same subject matter, that they were missing?
I did. I believe I called him as well.
And is it your recollection, still, after direct examination, cross-examination, that your last phone call with your brother was around February 1st?
Somewhere yes, sir.
Could have been the 2nd,
In that general window,
could have been January 31st.
rather than Chuba's birthday, I believe. So it was around that time.
What I'm getting at, though, is even though you may not be 100% precise about the date, was there something about your brother's demeanor that makes you remember that phone call?
Oh, you mean when he was going frantic and he was going to the bank?
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Okay. I don't remember the date of the phone call, but it was I just remember him saying there was money missing out of his account and he was going to the bank or something to that effect.
And what was his demeanor when telling you that?
Objection hearsay on the previous question, motion to strike previous answer.
You may answer. How would you describe his demeanor when he told you that?
He was frantic. He was in a hurry. He had a sense of urgency to him.
You used the word scurrying.
Correct.
What does that mean to you?
What I just described to you.
Okay. When you later, in 2013, talked to, your first time talking to San Bernardino investigators, you never mentioned the 4th or the 6th possibly being there at the house yourself, did you?
I'm not sure.
But during that interview, strike that. Even when you talked to Detective Bachman at that time, you had trouble being really precise about dates, didn't you?
Some time had elapsed, so yes, sir.
I think you said it in your direct testimony. I heard it when I re-listened to your interview last night. You use this, it's almost a crutch phrase. I have to look at the blueprints. You said it in your direct testimony. I think you may have said it in your cross. I may be mistaken. You said it in your interview. Why do you refer to that?
To blueprints?
Yeah.
Because I design and engineer fire sprinkler systems, and I do many, I use AutoCAD and different programs, and that's blueprints.
But you date those, right?
Blueprints is the old version of it. I mean, now
Sure.
we do everything on the computer, but back in the day, it was blue ink. It was written, it
Right.
was hand-drawn. But it's a new era, and we do it now on a computer.
But if you were to look at a set of blueprints and the date you drafted them or looked or had them,
Correct.
that would be a way for you to refresh your recollection.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
You didn't have blueprints available to you in Detective DeGaule's car, did you?
No, sir.
You didn't have them at the table when you were talking to Detective Bachman at the time?
No, sir.
Okay.
I was going off the top of my head.
So you had some cross-examination questions, and a lot of it, I think, really focuses on your memory, whether something happened the 9th or the 10th, okay? But I want to ask you this. Has anything that Mr. Moline has asked you changed your opinion that you had not heard from Joseph since February 1st?
That's correct.
Has anything that Mr. Moline asked you changed your belief that you were notified by your dad and Dan Kavanaugh?
No, sir.
Has anything changed your belief sitting here today that you then contacted your mom?
No, sir.
Has anything changed your recollection or belief sitting here today that you went to the house for the first time on the 13th with the defendant?
That is correct.
Has anything that you were asked changed the fact that the first time you talked to the defendant was because you called him?
I believe so, yes, sir.
Has anything in Mr. Moline's questioning changed your belief and recollection sitting here today that it was the defendant that pointed out the unlocked window to the office?
He pointed out the window, yes, sir.
Has anything changed your recollection that the defendant told you he had been there on Tuesday the 9th and the Thursday, was it Thursday or Friday the 12th?
The middle of the week, at some point. I thought it was Tuesday and Thursday, and even to this day, I believe it's Tuesday and Thursday. But I could be off on the days. I know for a fact I was there on the 13th. I know for a fact I was there on the 15th.
So nothing you've been asked has changed your belief, recollection, or opinion that the defendant told you he had been there at least 2 times prior to the 13th?
Absolutely. Correct.
And despite creative questioning by the defense, it is still your recollection.
Objection, argument.
Sustained.
Despite the questioning this morning and yesterday, is it still your recollection and belief that you have no recall of the defendant entering the house when you opened the door to invite him in?
That is correct.
And similarly, where that phone call was actually placed when you called it on that from the house on the 13th, whether it was inside or outside?
I feel like it was in the driveway, but I'm not 100% sure.
You weren't taking notes, were you?
I was not taking notes, sir.
You were just trying to be helpful and provide as much information as possible, correct?
Yes, sir.
Nothing further.
Anything on the product?
Thank you. As counsel's asking these questions, I do have to remind you, though, that you did testify, if I'm correct, that when you went to Deputy Tingley that first time at the Fallbrook Station, right in February 15th in the afternoon, your memory was better, right then, about February of 2010, than it was later on in 2014, correct?
Objection, asked and answered.
Sustained.
Counsel asked you yesterday, and this might require permission to go into this because it's beyond what I asked, what I went in on my questioning before, and I'm sure we're going to get an objection. So, but he asked you about, and he asked you about a statement that was made by you to Deputy Tingley about hacking. Do you remember that, about Mr. Merritt hacking into some computer of your brother's? Is that correct?
I'm not sure
He brought
what
up
he hacked into, but it was...
Well, Mr. Imes brought up a report for you to refresh your memory on a statement that you made to Deputy Tingley about Chase Merritt hacking into your brother's account. Do you recall that? You didn't
Yes,
remember,
sir.
but he brought up a report.
Oh, yes, sir. He only read the paper.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think you still didn't remember too much about that statement. Did you get a chance to think about that and what you told Deputy Tingley?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, you did testify that you didn't even know Mr. Merritt when you went to the Fallbrook station and saw Mr. Deputy Tingley, correct? You had heard of him, but you had never met him, you had never talked to him, correct?
I had.
Objection, misstates his testimony.
Sustained also cumulative.
You didn't, okay, you didn't know Mr. Merritt on that date, correct?
I only knew.
Objection, misstates his testimony.
The objection again is sustained as cumulative.
And Mr. Imes brought that report for you to review, and you recall reviewing it, correct?
Yes, sir. I read the paper.
Okay. And just so we're clear, because when you answered that question, it appeared that you still didn't remember making that statement. So do you remember telling Deputy Tingley that Chase Merritt hacked into an account of your brother's or something like that?
Do I remember making the statement?
Yes.
No, sir. It's been a long time.
Okay. So then other than Mr. Imes bringing up something for you to review, you don't have any independent recollection of making that statement, do you?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. Now, also, when you saw Deputy Tingley on February 15th, you did know Dan Cavanaugh because you had met him years before.
I've known Dan for years. And like I said, he's one of my brother's friend and an acquaintance.
And you knew that he had a nickname called Hacker Dan, right?
Objection assumes facts not evidence beyond the scope.
We all knew him as Red Dan, or Dan the Hacker, because he was really, really good with computers.
And he also was called Dan the Hacker because he was able to hack into people's accounts, correct?
Objection, foundation, possible.
When you made a statement about hacking into computers to Deputy Tingley, you were referring to Hacker Dan, weren't you?
Objection, speculation, argumentative.
Sustained as speculation since he indicates he doesn't recall making the statement.
Now, Mr. Imes told you or asked you about some statements made in February of 2010 to Detective DeGal, and he asked you whether you reviewed the transcript. He referred to it as Mr. Moline's transcript, and you said you hadn't because I hadn't given you any transcripts, had I, to review?
Yes, she didn't hand me anything.
Right. So that means that Mr. Imes gave you the transcript to review, correct?
I don't know if it's what it's called.
Okay.
It's a piece of paper.
And he gave you that transcript either last night or this morning, correct?
Right over there. This morning.
And he asked you to read that portion of the transcript, right?
Yes, sir.
And he told you what the, because likely that question would be coming up, correct? And he wanted you to read that portion of, just that portion of the transcript, correct?
I don't want to speak for him. I don't know his strategies. And I don't understand all that stuff.
Well, he didn't hand you the whole transcript and say, read this whole transcript, did he? This morning?
There was a piece of paper, one page. I don't know what it was.
So he actually isolated that piece of the transcript and had you read it, correct?
Was it I don't know if it's a transcript or a police report. I don't know what the difference is.
Okay. But whatever it was only one piece of paper, and he isolated it just to that portion, correct?
It was an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with a bunch of writing on it, and I read the whole page.
Do you have it?
No, sir.
Okay. So he had you read it, and then you took it back?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Nothing further. Thank you.
Anything else on redraft?
Nothing, it would be cumulative.
Indeed it would. any objection to Mr. Mcstay being excused?
No.
Subject to recall.
Subject to the evidence go for either past recollection recorded or impeaching statement, sure. All right, thank you, Mr. Mcstay, and you are excused. And we'll go ahead and take our morning recess, about 15 minutes before our next, you have your next witness here?
Yes, we have 3 witnesses. We're ready.
Okay. Oh, we'll put them all on at the same time. Try to speed things up. All right, I again remind you, do not form or express any opinions about the case, do not discuss the case, do not review anything. We'll see everyone back in about 15